Greetings and welcome to week 3. My name is Rachel and I will be talking about adaptive cycles. Last week was about complex adaptive systems, and adaptive cycles are an integral component of these. I will describe the transformation phases of the cycle and illustrate the relevance from a social change perspective. An adaptive cycle is a pattern of change in a social, economic, or ecosystem. The classic diagram illustrating the cycle can be seen here. It consists of a forward loop, which represents growth and stability, and a back loop, which represents change and variety. The R phase, or rapid growth, is where an organisation or culture experiences the most learning and building. The Kappa phase, or conservation phase, is about maintaining the status quo. An organisation will settle into business as usual. This is generally the longest phase and is characterised by stability. The omega phase, or release phase, is where a disturbance or catalyst causes the status quo to come undone. All the accumulated wealth and knowledge are released to be made use of in the next phase. The alpha phase, or renewal, is where all the previously released resources are reorganised into a new structure or regime for the growth phase to restart. The renewal phase can usually have several outcomes and is characterised by chaos and uncertainty. Panarchy, covered in more detail next week, is a collection of nested adaptive cycles, whereby the disturbance and release phase of one cycle, if it's severe enough and happens at the right time, can feed up the hierarchy to affect the cycle on a larger scale as a cascade effect. To illustrate the adaptive cycle in a social context, I'm going to use the Indigenous concept of cultural burning. Cultural burning is often thought of as an environmental matter. However, it has immense significance in the social context for Indigenous people, both ethically and spiritually. It uses a cool burning fire at the correct time of year for each land type in a way that reduces the fuel load without permanently damaging the ecosystem. The process itself is an adaptive cycle, but I will now address the social relevance by describing each phase in its social context. The growth phase of cultural burning is the accumulation of knowledge. Indigenous people cultivated the land for millennia, gaining skills and perfecting techniques to enable them to survive and thrive on the land. They learned which land to burn at which time of year, what the indicators are, and what would happen afterwards. Sometimes referred to as fire stick farming, this task was performed to reduce fuel loads and clear land for easy access. It also improved hunting and increased germination of plants as food and medicine sources. Perhaps most importantly, the Indigenous have a cultural responsibility to care for country. The conservation phase equates to stability and involved improving and streamlining the practice through trial and error and adaptive learning. An important part of the conservation phase would have been passing this knowledge onto younger generations so that skills are not lost over time. The release phase occurred when European settlers arrived and removed the Indigenous people from country. Without access to the land they're culturally responsible for, Indigenous people cannot practice burning. The land suffers, the people suffer, and the skills are being lost as they are not passed on to younger practitioners. The renewal phase is the current phase. Over recent years, Indigenous leaders like Victor Stephenson have been recognised for their traditional knowledge. There is a new recognition and respect growing for these traditional skills, and increasing community involvement and collaboration between government bodies, Indigenous leaders and landholders. The current renewal phase is progressing into the next growth phase as recognition leads to collaborative learning and we start a new cycle of knowledge accumulation. As traditional skills are practiced and knowledge is pooled with non-Indigenous fire experts, new techniques could be established, which may even be better. The renewal phase, sometimes called the reorganisation phase, is characterised by uncertainty and chaos. Although recognition of cultural burning has occurred, There are many other options which could have manifested out of the disorder of the release phase. For example, Indigenous people may have been entirely eradicated when the settlers arrived and the knowledge lost forever. Alternatively, colonisation may have been unsuccessful and disharmony arose within the Indigenous leaders. Knowledge would have been lost as it was not passed diplomatically between language groups. Uncertainty at this phase means that all options are valid and anything could arise as the elements rearrange themselves into a new regime. Thankfully, a regime of adaptive collaborative learning seems to have won, and hopefully will lead to both social and ecological benefits. Adaptive cycles can skip phases. Cool burns in the conservation phase avoid catastrophic wildfires, skipping the release and going straight to renewal. In social terms, had the colonists been adaptive instead of controlling, they may have skipped the cultural annihilation and gone straight to adaptive learning and skill sharing. Understanding adaptive cycles is important because knowing which phase of a cycle we are in helps us make predictions about what might happen next and the best way forward. Many policies or proposals, despite being well thought out, will not work if implemented in the incorrect phase of the cycle. I hope this has illustrated a social change example of adaptive cycles and the dangers of becoming complacent in a late conservation phase. The longer we have been in conservation, the smaller the trigger required to send us over the threshold. Please join me in the forum for some thought-provoking discussions. Thank you.